the Honourable Mark Burton, representing the government, ladies and gentlemen, I and the members of my household welcome you this morning to Government House. We hope that you will enjoy the ceremony, in fact we know you will enjoy the ceremony, and our hospitality, and that it will be a memorable day for all of you. On behalf of the Queen of New Zealand, it is my privilege to hold an investiture and to present to the recipients here assembled the insignia, decorations and medals to which they are entitled. All of you have in various ways rendered distinguished service to New Zealand, to the Commonwealth and to the Queen. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure that you will join me in thanking them for their services and in congratulating them on their well-merited awards. Mr. Official Secretary, will you please summon those whom Her Majesty has chosen to honour?
Your Excellency, to receive the insignia of a distinguished companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, Mrs. Margaret Millard of Palmerston North, for services to the rural community. Mrs. Millard has given many years of voluntary service and leadership to rural communities. She has been a member of Rural Women New Zealand, formerly the Women's Division of Federated Farmers, for 30 years, lately as President. In 1987, Mrs. Millard was the first woman to be elected as a Federated Farmers Provincial President, initiating the formation of the Rural Family Support Trust, a network to help rural people help themselves and to support members in difficult times. For 2 years, she was Director on the National Board of the Farm Education and Training Association. Since 1989, Mrs. Millard has been a member of the Open Polytechnic of New Zealand and has chaired that body since 1995. To receive the insignia of a companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, Professor Andrew Hornblow of Christchurch, for services to medicine and health services. Professor Hornblow has been Dean of the Christchurch School of Medicine and Dean of Health Sciences of Otago University. Since 1978, he has been based at the Christchurch School of Medicine, first as Senior Lecturer in Clinical Psychology, then in public health positions, including as Professor of Public Health. Professor Hornblow is a past president of the New Zealand Psychological Society, a former chairman of the Mental Health Foundation, and past president of the New Zealand Public Health Association. Professor Hornblow's numerous voluntary community contributions over 30 years have included advising and assisting the telephone counselling service Lifeline, the volunteer service abroad, and in recent years, the ComCare Charitable Trust in Christchurch. Mr. Peter Jackson of Wellington, for services to film. Mr. Jackson has played a major role in the development of the New Zealand film industry. During the last few years, he has directed in New Zealand the filming of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the first installment of which was recently released to much critical acclaim. Mr. Jackson's dedication, successes and commitment to New Zealand have given encouragement to the film industry in this country and led to increased employment and training opportunities here in the highly technical and specialized business of filmmaking. Your Excellency, may I now call on the Acting Secretary and Registrar of the Queen's Service Order and the Herald of the New Zealand Order of Merit to summon others who've received appointments to those orders.
Your Excellency, to receive the insignia of a Companion of the Queen's Service Order for Community Service, the Very Reverend Bruce HANSEN of Christchurch. Mr. HANSEN has made a major contribution to the Presbyterian Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand for over 30 years, including a term as moderator of the church. He is a former chair of the Hastings Birthright. Since moving to Christchurch in 1986, he has been minister of Knox Church. For more than 20 years, Mr. HANSEN has been a personal counsellor for at-risk youth, the elderly, solo parents, minority groups, Pacific and Maori people. Dr. Khalid SANDHU of Wellington. Dr. SANDHU has made an important contribution to medicine and the community for over 30 years. He has represented the New Zealand Medical Association and has been a lecturer at the Wellington School of Medicine since 1990. Dr. SANDHU was a founding member of the Interfaith Commission on Tertiary Education and is a former president and vice president of the Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand. To receive the insignia of a Companion of the Queen's Service Order for Public Services, Mr. William GAVIN of Auckland. Mr. GAVIN, the principal of Otahuhu College, Auckland since 1985, has made an important contribution to education for over 30 years. He was involved in the implementation of Tomorrow's Schools reforms and in 1989 and was consultant to the New Zealand Education Assistance Program. Mr. GAVIN was chairman of the New Zealand Secondary Schools Cultural Exchange Program from 1992 to 2000. To receive the insignia of an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit, Mr. Paul FITZHARRIS of Waitete, Otago, for services to the New Zealand Police, lately as an Assistant Commissioner. Mr. Harris served in the Criminal Investigation branches both in New Zealand and overseas, and in 1980 was promoted to Inspector and seconded to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he served as the Police Liaison Officer at the New Zealand High Commission in Singapore. In 1985, Mr. Harris returned to New Zealand as coordinator of the National Bureau of the Criminal Intelligence in Wellington. Before his retirement last year, he was the regional commander for the entire South Island. Mrs. Esther FUNG of Wellington, for services to the Chinese community. Mrs. FUNG is currently president of the Wellington Xiamen Association and a member of the Board of Management of the Multicultural Centre for Learning and Support Services. She is the chair of the organising committee for the Wellington Chinese Speech and Cultural Day and founding member of the New Zealand Chinese Language Association. Mrs. FUNG is also on the executive committee of the Wellington Chinese Association. the Reverend Rangikaheke HAIMONA of Taihape for services to Māori. Mr. HAIMONA has contributed tirelessly to the development of Māori and the wider community of Taihape. He works at the local and regional level through Kahangareo movement and more recently as a kaumātua with the regional Korowhai Kahui committee set up to develop protocols and offer training to police dealing with Māori. Mr. HAIMONA has been instrumental in the development of Māori health and social services, serving on the Social Services Management Executive since its inception in 1992. Mrs. June Hamilton of Napier for services to health administration and the community. For 9 years, Mrs. Hamilton represented Wairoa on the Hawke's Bay Hospital Board and was a member and later chairperson of the Wairoa Hospital Committee of Management. She established and led a range of community initiatives, mostly on a voluntary basis. In 1978, she co-founded and continues to chair the charitable Wairoa Hospital and Community Trust. In 1985, she helped found Wairoa's Drug and Alcohol Committee and has chaired that group since 1990. For 10 years, she chaired the Wairoa Day Centre, which provided day care for the elderly. Dr. Michael Hills of Hamilton for services to persons with epilepsy and the community. Dr. Hills joined the Epilepsy Association of New Zealand in 1976 and has played an active and leading role as a volunteer ever since. He set up a field officer scheme to supply social support to people with epilepsy throughout the Waikato and other centres, and continues to serve as supervisor and national director of services for the association. Dr. Hills is on the National Council and has chaired the Waikato branch of the National Association of the New Zealand Epilepsy Foundation. Dr. Hills has been Secretary General for the International Bureau for Epilepsy since 1993. Mr. Noel LYNCH of Wellington for services to rowing and music. Mr. LYNCH has been involved in rowing for 62 years, primarily as a coxswain, coach and volunteer administrator. He has devoted 50 years to coaching at all levels, particularly at secondary school level. He introduced or encouraged rowing at a number of schools, first as a teacher and after retirement as a volunteer coach. Mr. LYNCH is also an accomplished singer and in the 1950s sung in operas. Between 1953 and 1981, he organised numerous musical activities at secondary schools and judged at aria competitions. Ms. Gaylene Preston of Wellington for services to filmmaking. Ms. Preston, an independent producer and director, is regarded as one of New Zealand's foremost filmmakers. Her films include Mr. Wrong, Ruby and Rata, War Stories. Ms. Preston has served on the New Zealand Film Commission and the New Zealand Independent Producers and Directors Guild. Colonel Graeme Wilson of Auckland. Colonel Wilson joined the New Zealand Army in 1971 and is currently the commanding officer of the Auckland Northland Regiment. Over the last 30 years, Colonel Wilson has been instrumental in developing the role of the part-time or territorial army elements in the Auckland area. Colonel Wilson's drive and strategic vision has aided the transition of small units with very diverse roles into a single large entity focused on meeting the expectations of the modern army.
Your Excellency, to receive the insignia of a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit, Mr. Brian Harman of Christchurch, for services to the community. Mr. Harman served on the Riccarton Borough Council from 1977 to 1989. He did voluntary work as a member of the Canterbury District Legal Aid Committee from 1974 to 1991 and has been on the Law Society's panel of friends for more than 15 years. Mr. Harman has been honorary solicitor to many community groups, including the Disturbed Children's Aid Movement, the Royal Commonwealth Society, and Friends of the Christchurch Museum. He has been a trustee on the Special Persons Alternative Needs Trust since its establishment in 1991. Mrs. Lesley Harrison of Auckland, for services to the community. Mrs. Harrison, for many years, worked as a teacher of the blind and the deaf. Since her retirement in 1985, she has been active in various community causes, with emphasis on the aged and aging in the community. In 1993, she's helped set up the Senior Achievers Awards in 1993, and in 1987 became the inaugural chairperson of the Senior Achievers Charitable Trust. Mrs. Harrison was National President of the Retired Persons Association from 1993 to 1998. Mr. John Jefferson of Tauranga, for services to the elderly and to the community. Mr. Jefferson is very active in health and grey power activities. He has been involved in grey power since 1997 and is currently national president. Mr. Jefferson is also national president of Zipper Cardiac Support, a voluntary organization that supports those living with heart disease and those who have undergone heart surgery. He is a community representative on the board of Western Bay Health and chair of the Tauranga Health Advisory Group. Mr. Murray Jensen of Romati Beach, for services to local body and community affairs. Mr. Jensen has been involved with community and local body work for over 30 years. He is a former chairman of the Tawa Rotary Club. From 1992 to 2001, he was a member of the Kapiti District Council and was deputy mayor for 3 years. In 1991, Mr. Jensen was appointed chairperson of the Kapiti Community Centre Establishment Trust. Mrs. Jean Kneebone of Hamilton, for services to welfare work. Mrs. Kneebone is the National Vice President of the Schizophrenia Fellowship. She has been on the committee of the Schizophrenia Fellowship Waikato since 1988 and was the chairperson from 1994 to 1998. Mrs. Kneebone has worked closely with Horoa Waikato, the largest provider of Maori mental health services in the country. She has been a tireless advocate for people with mental illness and works closely with health, welfare, and accommodation providers. Mr. Michael Lynch of Carterton for services to community health in the South Pacific. Mr. Lynch has been largely responsible for improving the medical laboratory services in many Pacific Island nations. He worked as the sole tutor and operator with the Pacific Paramedical Training Center from 1985 to 2000. Mr. Lynch served as a consultant to laboratory services in Pacific Island countries at the request of the World Health Organization and the New Zealand Overseas Aid Program. Mr. Colin MacDonald of Christchurch for services to the potato industry. Mr. MacDonald has been a leader in the potato growing industry. He has been closely involved since the 1970s in the development of the pathogen tested seed potato scheme, arguably the most significant recent improvement in the industry, resulting in increased yields and greatly reduced disease in potato crops. Mr. MacDonald is a former chairman of the New Zealand Potato Board and current chairman of the Potato Industry Research Advisory Group. Mr. Trevor Maxwell of Rotorua for services to Māori, arts and local body affairs. Mr. Maxwell has been a member of the Rotorua District Council since 1977 and was a member of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council from 1989 to 1992. He has been involved with a variety of Māori cultural programs for over 30 years. Mr. Maxwell has been chairman of the Te Arawa Festival Organising Committee since 1991. Mr. John Newton of Turangi for services to conservation. Mr. Newton has been associated with Tongariro National Park for over 30 years. He was appointed a ranger at the park in 1966 and has served as director of the Department of Lands and Survey's International Training School at Tongariro. He was a foundation member of the Tongariro National Historical Society. Mr. Newton was part of the team that restored the historic Cape Evans and Shackleton huts in Antarctica in 1988. Mr. Aaron Slight of Masterton for services to motorsport. Mr. Slight, a professional motorcycle racer, is considered to be one of the best riders in the world. In 1995, he became the first ever rider to win the grueling Suzuki 8-hour race in Japan on 3 successive occasions. Mr. Slight was placed second in the World Superbike Series in 1996, 1997, and 1998, and holds many national and international titles. Ms. Fran Walsh of Wellington, for services to film. Ms. Walsh has played a pivotal role in the development of the New Zealand film industry. She was co-writer of several award-winning films and co-writer and casting director of Heavenly Creatures, which had an Academy Award nomination for Best Screenplay in 1995. During the last few years, Ms. Walsh has co-written and co-produced the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Ms. Gabrielle Welsh of Christchurch, for services to the community and to persons with disabilities. Ms. Welsh has made an outstanding contribution to the Hallsville community. For many years, she was on the staff at a school for intellectually disabled boys and has worked untiringly for the intellectually disabled and their families. Ms. Welsh has also been involved in Meals on Wheels in the Hoonhay and Hallsville areas for 15 years and assists the Granada Day Care Centre. Mr. Mark Willis of Turangi, for services to karate. Mr. Willis was instrumental in setting up the Japan Karate Association of New Zealand in 1977. He has had a major influence on the training of many students and instructors. Since 1981, Mr. Willis has coached and/or managed many New Zealand teams, including youth teams at New Zealand, Australian, World Cup, and other karate championships. Your Excellency, to receive the insignia of an honorary member of the New Zealand Order of Merit, Professor Shunsuke Takahashi of Tokyo, Japan, for services to karate. Professor Takahashi, a Japanese citizen, has made a major contribution to the sport of karate in New Zealand. For the past 25 years, he has held the position of Chief Instructor of the Japan Karate Association and has returned to New Zealand every 6 months during this time. Professor Takahashi and his family have hosted many members of the New Zealand Association who have traveled to Japan for competitions.
Your Excellency, to receive the Queen's Service Medal for Community Service, Mr. Thomas Dew of Auckland. Mr. Dew has served the Mangere community in various ways for the past 30 years, including assisting with the development of the Boys' Town in Auckland and the Chinese Community Centre in Mangere Bridge. Mr. Dew was president of the Chinese Ball Committee during the late 1970s and early 80s, which raised funds for local charities and contributed significantly to the development of the Mangere community, work he continues with today. Mrs. Marion Fisher of Whangarei. Mrs. Fisher has been involved with various community groups for over 30 years, including 29 years as a 24-hour Lifeline telephone counsellor and as secretary of the Whangarei branch of Lifeline. For the past 16 years, Mrs. Fisher has been secretary of the Northland Performing Arts Competition Society. Mrs. Jean GATTON of Kihiki. Mrs. GATTON has supported various projects in the Kihiki community for over the last 25 years and was instrumental in the beautification of the Roe Maniapoto Reserve. Mrs. GATTON has tirelessly worked with the town's young people in periodic detention teams to complete projects both to clean up and beautify the town over the years, despite debilitating arthritis. Miss Jenny Green of Dunedin. Miss Green is a volunteer with many community groups and organisations in Dunedin. She is currently National Secretary of the Post-Polio Support Society of New Zealand and is a past president of the Otago branch. Miss Green serves at the Disability Information Desk at Dunedin Hospital and is a strong advocate for the ethnic communities and immigrants from Cambodia, Burma and Russia. Mrs. Eva Hammond of Rawene. Mrs. Hammond has been an active volunteer in the Rawene community since 1979. She has been a weekly hospital visitor and is active in a local church. Mrs. Hammond has at various times served as a St John Ambulance volunteer officer and as secretary of the Ratepayers Association. Mrs. Anne Hobbs and Mr. Donald Hobbs of Auckland. Mr. and Mrs. Hobbs helped establish the Brittle Bone Association of New Zealand in 1982. They have been active in various roles for the association, which is a charitable organisation supporting people with the condition that causes brittle bones. Mr. and Mrs. Hobbs have also been volunteers for 10 and 20 years respectively for the Pakuranga Communicare Day Centre, a non-profit organisation providing day care for the elderly and the disabled. Mrs. Edith Holdsworth of Wainuiomata. Mrs. Holdsworth has been a helper for the Wainuiomata Girls Brigade since 1958. In 1966, she was commissioned as a junior leader of the 1st Wainuiomata Girls Brigade Company and was promoted to captain in 1974, which post she still holds today. Mr. Brian Innes of New Plymouth. Mr. Innes, in 1988, instigated the formation of the City of New Plymouth Cadet Unit and has maintained a close interest in the unit. Since 1990, he has been instrumental in ensuring the success of the biennial Searchlight Tattoo. This event draws on the skills and talents of a wide cross-section of local musicians and artists who perform alongside the New Zealand and overseas Defence Force personnel to perform at a show of military pageantry and skill. Ms. Marlene Shipman of Wellington. Ms. Shipman has worked for many Wellington community organisations over the last 30 years, including the Wellington Tramping and Mountaineering Club, the Water Safety Committee, the New Zealand Water Safety Council and the Red Cross. Ms. Shipman was a trustee of the National Advocacy Trust and subsequently trained as a crisis intervention worker for Victim Support Group. She is currently on the Wellington Victim Support Management Committee.
Your Excellency, to receive the Queen's Service Medal for Public Services, Dr. Ivan Howie of Great Barrier Island. Dr. Howie has made a major contribution to the remote Great Barrier Island community as a minister and general practitioner for over 20 years. As a doctor, he is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, often traveling great distances to reach his patients. Dr. Howie was instrumental in establishing the Great Barrier Island Community Health Trust. As a minister, he regularly officiates at christenings, weddings, funerals, unveilings, and other functions. Mr. Tony Hunt of Foxton. Mr. Hunt has had a lifelong interest in recording the history of Foxton. An office holder in the Foxton Historical Society for many years, he helped establish Foxton's Historical Museum. Mr. Hunt has been a member of the Foxton Community Board since 1992 and has held positions of responsibility in the Foxton Lions, Rugby, Golf and Bowling Clubs, the Flax Stripper Museum and the Little Theatre Society. Mr. Brent Martin of Tauranga. Mr. Martin has been involved in land search and rescue in Tauranga since the early 1960s. He has held a number of appointments in both search and rescue and the local Coast Guard organizations, and is currently the senior land search advisor to the police for the Tauranga area. Mr. Martin has participated in a number of major police operations, including several homicide inquiries. Constable Jack Milford of Lower Hutt. Constable Milford deployed to East Timor in May 2000 as part of a New Zealand police contingent on United Nations duties. He served in the Urkusi district, an enclave surrounded by Indonesian West Timor and inaccessible by road from East Timor. As a personal commitment to the people of Urkusi, Constable Milford arranged for 3 containers full of much-needed goods to be collected in Wellington and shipped there for the distribution to local charities. Mr. Michael Moore of Christchurch. Mr. Moore joined the New Zealand Police in 1965, serving in the Dunedin and Christchurch areas. In 1990, Senior Sergeant Moore was appointed to the Sydenham-Linwood Care and Protection Panel to consider care and placement of children and young people at risk. He retired last year. Mr. Frank Moult of Palmerston North. Mr. Moult recently retired after 30 years as a police officer in both the United Kingdom and New Zealand. He served as a youth aid officer in Palmerston North. In this role, as a senior constable, Mr. Moult has participated in the development of diversion and restorative justice programs for youth. Sergeant Steve O'Connor of Lower Hutt. Sergeant O'Connor joined the New Zealand Police in 1993, serving in Lower Hutt and Wainuiomata. In 1997, he was involved with developing and implementing the Joint Team Youth at Risk program in Wainuiomata. Sergeant O'Connor's role has been to draw on his experience as a social worker to integrate young people back into the community, supporting their families and schools. His work in the area has reduced offending. Mr. William Rees of Wellington. Mr. Rees has been involved with community work for many years. Since 1993, he has been a volunteer with the community police at Tawa and more recently at Pororua. He continues to work there, advising victims of the progress of their complaints. In 1969, Mr. Rees helped form the Wellington Ostomy Association, of which he was the founding chairman, subsequently becoming president of the New Zealand Federation of Ostomy Societies. Mr. John Watson of Havelock North, lately a detective with the New Zealand Police. Mr. Watson was a police officer from 1980 until his recent retirement. In May 2000, he was posted to East Timor as part of the New Zealand Police contingent serving with the United Nations. He was stationed in the remote Bubanara district on the Indonesian border as commander of the local civilian police station, the biggest in the district. Mr. Watson's leadership and personal qualities fostered a strong sense of security within the local population, helping to restore order to the area. Mrs. Sandra Yaxley of Christchurch. Mrs. Yaxley has been heavily involved in the activities of Christchurch Victim Support since becoming a member of their executive committee in 1990. In 1994, Mrs. Yaxley joined the Government Working Party overseeing the introduction of counselling schemes for families of homicide victims. She was subsequently elected to the National Executive of the Council of Victim Support Groups and has instructed on homicide victim support courses at the Royal New Zealand Police College. In 1997, she established a Christchurch Homicide Survivors Group. Not yet. Your Excellency, that completes the investiture.
Ngā manuhiri tuarangi, ngā rangatira mā, ngā iwi o te motu, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. We have visitors here today from overseas. We have many respected guests, and we have, of course, many people to New Zealand. And I want to greet and thank all of you for coming today. Twice a year, I have the great honour of meeting a small number of people from all corners of New Zealand who have come to Government House for their investiture. While my duties as Governor-General encompass a wide range of activities, these ceremonies for me are among the most important events of the year. In a world where so much is measured by dollars and cents, it is important to recognise and to celebrate other achievements, particularly those that have benefited the community or have given us a sense of pride in being New Zealanders. That is why this occasion, when we show our gratitude to those who have done so much for our country, is so important to me. Some of you may already have had recognition for your work. For others, it may be the first time. But one thing I can say is that for all of you, the honour you have received today is well deserved. I am particularly pleased that we have among us people from all walks of life and all reaches of society. The New Zealand honours system, and it is a system that is genuinely New Zealand, is based on merit and merit alone. The New Zealand honours system recognises achievement on behalf of and for all New Zealanders. It recognises community involvement, selfless dedication, ingenuity, intelligence and talent. This gathering then makes today a special day, not only for me, but for you, the recipients of the New Zealand Honours, and for the whole of New Zealand. For this is a day where we as a nation can say thank you to all who have done so much for us. You display the very best of our national character. It is my hope that your work and your example will inspire other New Zealanders to work as tirelessly and as selflessly as each of you have. It has been a great privilege for me to confer these honours on you today. On behalf of all New Zealanders, I congratulate you for what you have achieved, and I thank you for what you have done for your fellow citizens. Now, shortly, the formal part of this ceremony will end, and I hope then that you will join me in walking through Government House and having a look around your house, and also enjoying our hospitality. But before we retire from this room, would you please join in singing both verses of the National Anthem?